Hey guys, it's Madison Estes. Welcome back to my channel. I was recently interviewed by Fanbase Press about the anthology that I edited last year, Roadkill Texas Horror by Texas Writers, Volume 6. I'm going to go over the questions that they asked me, most of which were about editing this anthology and putting the stories together. The first question is, as the editor and a contributing writer, how would you describe your thematic approach when arranging stories for a horror collection? The main theme of the collection and of the series in general is about Texas horror, so I wanted to make sure that there were a lot of stories that contained lots of elements of the South. One of the stories, Cemetery Days, starts off with a Southern community picnic before delving into some good old-fashioned monster horror. The story, The Sons of Billy Clay by Stephen Graham Jones, is about the souls of serial killers getting transferred into bulls who then murder riders at the rodeo. And Fandango is about a cursed sandstorm. All of the stories in this collection take place in Texas, but I wanted to make sure that the front end of this anthology is loaded with stories that could only take place in the South. I wanted there to be a good balance of realistic horror stories and supernatural horror stories, so there's stories in this collection that revolve around mental illness and just innate human evilness, as well as stories about like monsters and hauntings. And I also focused on story length. I wanted to kind of spread out the longer stories and make sure that they were next to shorter stories to kind of help with pacing. Lastly, I also focused on trying to spread out some of the strangers' stories. Although I would say all of the stories in this collection are very unique, there's definitely some that are just a whole different level of strange, and I wanted to make sure that they're spread out throughout the collection so that you're not constantly expecting, these super strange stories. I did this both to not overwhelm the reader with strangeness and also not to disappoint them whenever some of the follow-up stories aren't quite as strange. The next question is, what can you tell us about the shared creative process of working with the creators to shepherd their stories to completion? Okay, so I have several videos on this channel where I talk about every story in the anthology and working with the authors and what the process was like. And I also have a separate video on, selecting stories for the anthology and that whole process. I'm going to include links to those videos in the description box below if you want to check those out after watching this. But to summarize, most stories ended up needing at least 2 revisions. The first one to work on line edits and minor story improvements, and then the second revision to work on proofreading. With some authors like Stephen Graham Jones and Bev Vincent, I just did proofreading, and then with other authors, I got a little bit more involved in the process. There was one story in the anthology where I kind of helped the author work on the climax of their story to make it feel a little bit more like the climax of the story so that it doesn't just go completely from climax to resolution. It feels like there's a little bit of a break between those 2 moments. And then in the story For Sale by Owner, there was this one scene where one of the characters apologized to the other one, and then I talked to the author about that, and ultimately we decided to cut that part because it added a little bit of confusion to the ending and to one of the characters' motivation. So we ended up cutting that, and we were both really happy with the final product. This was my first time editing an anthology, and it was really interesting being on the other side of it. I've been in several anthologies and I've worked with several editors, and I've also worked as an editor in my freelance business, but it was just really interesting being the one to pick these stories, put them together, arrange them, and also, work with the authors to make their stories as good as they could possibly be. The next question is, what can you share with us about your own story in the anthology, and what were some of your creative influences? So I got the idea for my story whenever I was listening to Getaway Car by Taylor Swift. My mom and grandmother are huge true crime fans, and I can't count how many times I've seen a documentary or a miniseries on Bonnie and Clyde, so both of those were really big inspirations for the story. I thought it would be really fun to write a story about a car mechanic who gets more than he bargained for whenever he wins the bid to restore Bonnie and Clyde's getaway car. I wasn't sure if I was going to have enough time to write this story for the anthology because I just had so much work with getting this anthology together, editing everything, and then also working on my business at the same time. But then I accidentally visited Parker and Barrow whenever I was in Dallas, and whenever I saw Bonnie and Clyde newspaper clippings on the wall, I just knew that I had to write this story for this anthology. It just felt way too much like fate. I just had to do it. As much as I find this duo interesting, I'm also just a little bit disturbed by how modern society has glamorized them so much as if they were Robin Hood just because they gave some of their victims money. They killed innocent people, and they killed cops that were just doing their jobs. They weren't completely without compassion, but they definitely were not vigilantes. They were criminals, and I tried to depict them that way in my story. I have my own bias in that I see Clyde as being the main instigator and Bonnie as just kind of going along with it and getting sucked into this life of crime because of her affection for him, and also possibly because of some delusions of grandeur. And this is how I depicted their relationship in my story. Although I flipped the script a little bit and made it so that the mechanic ends up falling head over heels for Bonnie and ends up kind of getting pulled into her criminal activities that are fueled by her desire for fame. What makes Death's Head Press the perfect home for continuing this anthology? Death's Head Press is an independent horror publisher that specializes in the grotesque and bizarre, making it perfect for Roadkill Volume 6. This publisher has printed anthologies such as Breaking Bizarro, which contain oddball horror stories that feel very similar to some of the stories in this collection. They also publish more visceral horror stories as well, comparable to some of the stories in this anthology like The Teeth and The Chickens That Are Not Her Chickens. Are there any upcoming projects that you are currently working on that you would like to share with our readers? At the moment, I'm currently working on a cybercrime novel about a pair of siblings who get in way over their heads whenever they try to rob the boss that fired one of them the week before Christmas. After that, I'm going to finish my first bizarro horror story, Blister Baby, about a teenage boy that discovers an embryo growing inside of one of his blisters. He wants to get an abortion, but the Texas government interferes, and then the story kind of falls into the realm of The Handmaid's Tale. My favorite bizarro stories are ones that contain elements of social satire, like Bad Box by Carlton Mellick III. His work is really inspiring me to finish this story. Lastly, what is the best way for our readers to find out more information about Roadkill Volume 6 and your other work? You can find out more information about Roadkill 6 on Amazon and Goodreads. I will include links in the description box below. And you can find out more information about me and my upcoming projects by going to my Amazon author page, my author website, or by subscribing to this channel. Thank you so much for watching this video, and thank you to Fanbase Press for this interview and this opportunity to promote Roadkill 6. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe. On this channel, I post book reviews, writing advice, horror content, and vlogs. And be sure to check out Roadkill 6 Texas Horror by Texas Writers. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you later.